The unexpected invitation. For 3 years, Olivia Monroe swept marble floors, polished silver trays, and dusted antique chandeliers in silence. She was invisible to the powerful man she worked for, until one evening changed everything. It was just past 7 p.m. in the sprawling penthouse of Mason Thorne, one of the city's most ruthless business tycoons. His voice could silence a boardroom in seconds. His decisions could move markets. But tonight, his world teetered on the edge of collapse. A $300 million merger was in crisis, and everything rested on an impromptu dinner with a group of unforgiving European investors. And he had no date. Olivia had just finished setting fresh tulips in the living room vase when she heard her name echo from Mason's home office. She blinked, surprised. In all her years working there, he had never once addressed her directly, never even made eye contact unless issuing a command through his assistant. "Yes, sir," she asked cautiously as she stepped in. Mason stood beside his desk, jacket off, tie loosened. His sharp jaw was clenched, eyes scanning her like she were a number in a ledger. "I need someone to accompany me to a dinner. Tonight." Olivia blinked. "Sir, this is not an invitation. I'm not in the mood for explaining. You'll come, you'll be quiet, and you'll behave." "Understood." Her heart raced. She wasn't sure what was more shocking, the fact that he'd asked her to attend a business dinner, or the complete lack of regard in his tone. But something in her stirred. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was opportunity. "Yes," she said softly. "Understood." By 8:15 p.m., Olivia stood in front of a full-length mirror wearing a black silk gown she borrowed from the guest wardrobe, a backup closet for Mason's high-profile events. She'd done her makeup subtly, her hair pinned elegantly. She looked like someone else, someone who didn't serve breakfast trays at 6 a.m. or scrub grout from bathroom tiles. Outside, Mason waited by the black Bentley, impatient and impersonal. He didn't compliment her appearance. He didn't even glance at her. By 9 p.m., they were seated in the Grand Orleans, an elite French fusion restaurant in the city's financial district, known for hosting world-changing deals and billion-dollar conversations. Their table was nestled in a private alcove, lit by a golden chandelier. 5 men and 2 women were already seated, each of them representing a powerful European investment firm. Their suits were tailored, their jewelry subtle but expensive, and their expressions tight with curiosity as Mason gestured to Olivia. "This is Olivia. She's accompanying me tonight." A few eyebrows rose. One man glanced at her hands, another at her shoes. Their judgment wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Olivia sat quietly, absorbing the tense energy. Mason didn't speak to her again. The table erupted in financial jargon, rapid back and forth about percentages, global expansion models, tech integrations. She recognized some of the terms. She read the Financial Journal in the break room every morning. But she knew her role. Mason had made it clear. Behave. Stay quiet. But midway through the evening, a tall, balding man with a European accent turned toward her. "So, Olivia, what do you do?" Mason stiffened. Olivia glanced at him, then back to the man. "I work in domestic management," she replied politely. "Ah," he said, smirking slightly. "So tonight must be quite the experience for you, no?" Mason gave her a warning glance. He expected her to blush, nod awkwardly, and fall silent. Instead, Olivia folded her hands gracefully and smiled. "It is, but observing how the most powerful people discuss the future is fascinating. It also makes you wonder, are numbers the only thing guiding decisions, or is there room for conscience?" The table quieted. Mason's eyes narrowed. The investor chuckled, impressed. "And what do you think? Is there room for both?" "I think there has to be," Olivia said. "Money can build skyscrapers and rockets, but people build trust, loyalty, and legacy." The atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't just a decoration at the table. She was part of the conversation. Another investor leaned forward. "What are your thoughts on corporate philanthropy?" Should companies focus solely on profit? Mason was about to speak, but Olivia's voice, calm and confident, interrupted him. I believe profit is important, but without purpose it becomes empty. Businesses should uplift the communities they depend on. Otherwise, what's the point of success? One of the women at the table, who had been silent until now, nodded thoughtfully. She makes a good point. Mason was livid. He clenched his jaw, cutting into his steak so hard his knife squeaked against the plate. He had brought Olivia to be silent, to fill a seat and help him appear human. But now she had stolen the spotlight. When dessert was served, the conversation turned to social enterprise, leadership philosophies, and mentorship programs. And again, it was Olivia who held the table's attention. And Mason. He didn't say another word. When the evening finally ended and they stepped outside into the chilled city air, Mason didn't wait for the valet or for Olivia. He walked off toward the car alone. Back at the penthouse, silence filled the vast marble foyer. Then Mason turned sharply and faced her. What were you thinking? He snapped. Olivia, still composed, looked him in the eye. You told me to behave. I did. I also spoke when I was spoken to. I brought you to be discreet, he barked, not to challenge me at my own table. And yet, Olivia said softly, they listened to me. Maybe that says more about what they needed than what you wanted. There was a long pause. You're fired. The words hit her like cold water. But Olivia didn't cry. She didn't protest. She simply straightened her back, nodded once, and said, thank you for the opportunity. Then she walked away. Later that night, while Mason stared at his glass of whiskey and brooded in the darkness of his penthouse, Olivia received a phone call. Miss Monroe, said a warm voice on the other end. This is Gabriel Duval from the European Investors Consortium. I'd like to offer you a job. Olivia's eyes widened. Why me? Because tonight, you reminded us what true leadership sounds like, and we're in desperate need of that. The rise of Olivia Monroe. The phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. After the dinner that changed everything, Olivia Monroe found herself at the center of a whirlwind she hadn't expected. Her name, once unknown beyond the stone walls of Mason Thorne's penthouse, was now being passed between executive assistants, high-level consultants, and venture capitalists. All because she'd spoken from the heart. Gabriel Duval, the man who had initially asked her the condescending question at the table, had been the first to call. We're building a new division, he'd said, focused on ethical investment and community-first enterprise models. We need someone who understands the ground level, someone with vision, but more importantly, someone who knows how to listen. You. Olivia didn't say yes immediately. She took a walk first, through the public park where she used to sit during her breaks, past the small cafe where she'd saved up for a single latte on Sundays, along the sidewalk she used to scrub while dreaming of more. By the time she reached her modest apartment door, she had decided. Yes. 2 months later, Olivia stood in a sunlit glass office overlooking the city, not as a cleaner, not as a silent servant in heels and borrowed pearls, but as the director of people and purpose at Duval Capital. She had a nameplate on her office door, an assistant of her own, a salary that made her mother weep with joy. But more than that, she had influence. Under Olivia's guidance, the firm had already launched its first 3 community programs, a small business mentorship initiative, a free financial literacy camp for underprivileged youth, a quarterly grant for single mothers launching home-based startups. Each project had her fingerprints on it, and people noticed. Olivia quickly gained a reputation, not just for her intelligence and poise, but for her unwavering empathy in every decision. Where others saw profit margins, she saw potential. Where others saw risk, she saw responsibility. Gabriel Duval called her the conscience of the company. But not everyone was happy. Across the city, Mason Thorne slammed his fist against the sleek glass table in his 34th floor boardroom. She's what? His assistant nervously adjusted his glasses. Olivia Monroe. She's been appointed to Duval Capital's leadership team. Director level. She's heading their new CSR initiatives. Mason's jaw tightened. You mean to tell me I fired her? And now she's outmaneuvering us in front of the very investors we were courting. The assistant nodded, unsure of how to respond. Worse still, their merger had officially stalled. One of the major partners, Duval's firm, had backed away last minute. Investors were losing patience. Stockholders were nervous. Mason had always trusted data, logic, control. But now his empire was cracking, and he couldn't deny it anymore. He sat back in his chair, staring at the city skyline with something unfamiliar brewing inside him. Regret. Meanwhile, Olivia entered a boardroom for the first time, not as a guest or a server, but as a speaker. It was her proposal on the table. The $1 million partnership with a local community bank to provide microloans to first-time entrepreneurs in low-income neighborhoods. The numbers were solid, the impact undeniable. She clicked the last slide and faced the room. But sitting in the far corner was a familiar face. Mason Thorne. Her heart skipped. What was he doing here? He hadn't even acknowledged her presence when she walked in. But now his eyes met hers. Gone was the dismissive smirk, the cold detachment, the arrogance. He looked different, a little older, a little humbled, still dangerous in his precision, but no longer invincible. After the meeting, Olivia stayed behind to pack up her materials when Mason approached. You really run this place now, he said, tone lower, softer. I work here, yes, she replied coolly, not rising to his bait. He hesitated, then said, You surprised me that night. At dinner. Olivia didn't answer. I didn't expect you to speak up, or for anyone to care what you had to say. Still, she remained quiet, her eyes steady. And now, Mason continued, they do care. A lot. Olivia crossed her arms. Why are you here, Mason? He sighed, a rare moment of vulnerability flickering across his features. Because I lost something that night, and I didn't realize how valuable it was until it was gone. Her expression didn't change, but her voice softened slightly. You didn't lose me. You let me go. Another pause. You're right, he admitted. I thought leadership meant control, power, dominance. But watching you work, I see now, it's about connection, compassion, purpose. Olivia raised an eyebrow. And you're just realizing this now. I am, he said honestly. And I want to fix what I broke. You can't undo the past, Mason, she replied. But you can choose what kind of man you'll be from here on out. And with that, she walked past him, back at Mason's company. The walls were closing in. Board members were restless. Loyal staff were leaving. Investor confidence was slipping by the day. In a last-ditch move, Mason initiated internal reforms, slashing unethical projects, proposing diversity hires, and reevaluating their entire CSR strategy. And who did he request to consult on the transition? Olivia. She was hesitant at first, suspicious, but Gabriel encouraged her. Sometimes the best changes come from the most unlikely hands, he said. Besides, you're not just leading projects now. You're inspiring transformation. 1 month later, Olivia entered Mason Thorne's boardroom again. Not as his housekeeper, not even as his adversary, but as his teacher. She laid out a plan, a restructured business model, a people-first approach, transparent supply chains, employee wellness initiatives, community reinvestment targets. And Mason. He listened. For the first time in his career, he didn't interrupt. That night, after the meeting, Mason waited for her in the elevator lobby. I meant what I said before, he said quietly. You changed me. She looked at him, thoughtful. No, you changed yourself. I just reminded you what mattered. A silence passed between them. Then he asked, hesitantly, would you ever consider Dinner. No investors. No speeches. Just you and me. As equals. Olivia smiled faintly. Let's focus on fixing your company first. Then we'll talk about dinner. As the elevator doors opened, she stepped in and looked back at him. Good night, Mr. Thorne. And with a soft ding, the doors close. Mason stood alone, watching the elevator lights fade, his empire shaken, but his heart starting to rebuild. He wasn't just chasing profit anymore. Now, he was chasing purpose. And maybe, just maybe, Olivia Monroe. Legacy of change. 1 year later, the city skyline shimmered with twilight gold as people filed into the newly constructed Hope Rise Community Center. Built in the heart of the neighborhood Olivia Monroe once walked through with weary feet and big dreams, it now stood tall, a symbol of change, possibility, and human dignity. At the entrance, a sleek marble plaque was mounted on the wall, reading, "In honor of those who serve and inspire." Founded by the Monroe Thorne Initiative. Yes, Monroe Thorne. A year ago, that pairing might have seemed like a cruel joke. A millionaire who fired his housekeeper for speaking up, now standing beside her as a partner, not only in business, but in something deeper. But this wasn't a fairy tale born from convenience. It was the result of hard work, self-reflection, and the most powerful force of all, growth. Back then, after Olivia agreed to consult for Mason's failing empire, things didn't change overnight. In fact, the first few months were tough. Some board members didn't take her seriously, until she proved, through data and human stories, that her reforms actually worked. Employee turnover dropped. Brand reputation soared. One viral video of a teary employee sharing how her new flexible schedule allowed her to care for her autistic son brought in over 3 million views and international praise. Olivia implemented what Mason never had: heart. Mason, to his credit, didn't just watch. He learned. He started showing up at community events, not as the star, but as a listener. He began attending every feedback session with employees, making eye contact, taking notes. Once, when a janitor broke down over not affording medical bills for his wife, Mason paid the full cost quietly. No cameras, no PR stunts. Because this time, he meant it. One night, inside Mason's office, they were working late, reviewing plans for the Purpose and Profit rebranding campaign. Olivia sat cross-legged on the leather sofa, a stack of papers in her lap. Mason leaned against the window, arms crossed. "You know," he said slowly, "my father used to say that kindness was weakness, that if you didn't strike first, the world would eat you alive." Olivia looked up. "Do you still believe that?" He met her eyes. "Not anymore." They were quiet for a while. Then Mason walked over and sat beside her, close but respectful. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice quieter now, "about how far we've come, about how far you brought me. And I want to ask you something." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Another business proposal?" "No," he said with a small smile. "A personal one." Her heart skipped. "I want to build something lasting. Not just a company, not just programs or centers. I want to build a legacy with someone I trust, someone I admire, someone I care about." Olivia looked down, then back at him. "I care about you too, Mason. But we're still healing, still growing. Let's not rush something this important." He nodded. "Then let's grow it. Together." In the following months, the Monroe Thorne Foundation was born, a nonprofit arm dedicated to revitalizing underserved communities, launching schools, career programs, and mental health initiatives. They co-led workshops for young entrepreneurs. They stood side by side at ribbon cuttings. Olivia took the stage at tech summits, while Mason learned to applaud instead of dominate. And somewhere between the conferences, the spreadsheets, and the shared cappuccinos, they found love. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, steady, respectful kind. Built on trust, on time, on truth. No. Inside the Hope Rice Center, Olivia stood before a packed auditorium, filled with students, mothers, veterans, teachers, and aspiring dreamers. Behind her, a banner read, "Changing the world begins with listening." She took the microphone, her voice warm and steady. 2 years ago, I was cleaning staircases in silence. Today, I help design staircases of opportunity for others. Not because I was lucky, but because someone finally listened. Her eyes found Mason in the front row. His expression, proud, a little teary, held every emotion he once didn't know how to feel. "We are not defined by where we start," Olivia continued. "We are defined by how we rise, and how we help others rise with us." The crowd stood, clapping. Mason joined her on stage as she finished her speech. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence, his growth, his transformation was speech enough. They walked off the stage, hand in hand, surrounded by cheers and hope. Later that evening, as the event wound down, a young girl approached Olivia. She wore worn-out shoes and held a tattered notebook. "Miss Monroe," the girl whispered, "how did you know you were smart enough to be a leader?" Olivia knelt beside her, taking her small hands. "Because I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was," she said gently. "And I started believing it for myself." The girl smiled, hugged her tight, and ran back to her mother. Mason, watching the exchange, exhaled deeply. "That," he said, "is more powerful than any billion-dollar deal I've ever made." Olivia smiled. "Funny how everything you were chasing was waiting on the other side of humility." A few months later, Mason and Olivia hosted a gala dinner, not for investors, but for community leaders and young changemakers. No tuxedos, no elitism, just purpose and passion. As the evening drew to a close, Mason raised a glass. "A few years ago," he said, "I thought success was about dominance, about winning. But now I know it's about who you uplift along the way." He looked at Olivia. "And if you're lucky, the person you once underestimated might just become the person who helps you become your best self." Applause filled the room. And Olivia, she didn't just smile. She stepped forward and whispered, "I think I'm ready for that dinner now. As more than your partner in purpose." Mason smiled wide. "As what then?" She held up his hand and said softly, "Let's find out." EPILOGE. Years later, the Monroe Thorne Foundation now spans 6 countries. They've helped over 40,000 families, launched 1,200 small businesses, and started 18 schools. But more than the numbers were the lives. And every time someone asked how it all began, Olivia would simply say, "It started the day someone told me to sit quietly at a dinner table, and I chose to speak anyway."